Civil War atrocities and murder from settlement to date? What about unsolved mysteries that continue to linger? You bet. We want you to join us as we explore these wild tales, often with intriguing guests and an endless supply of curiosity. Pull up a chair and sit a spell. You are now in the wild and woolly Ozarks. Gentle people, gather up the kids and the old folks. Shut down the contraptions and dim the lights. It's time to experience stories from the hills and hollers, the riverbanks and the brush. It's time to venture into the wild and woolly Ozarks. I'm your native guide and host, Champ Herren. Welcome back, folks. There should be music there. We keep discussing that, but so far we haven't done it. Want to thank you all for joining us again. There's been a little delay in getting these episodes out. I want to apologize for that. And one part of that was a little technical problem we had to work out. And now we're the better for it. If you don't mind, if you like these kind of stories that we're telling today, hit that subscribe button and follow us where you get your podcasts or over on Facebook and Instagram. Leave us a good review. It all helps. You don't want to miss an episode because, man, we've got some stuff coming up. Today, we have with us Cameron Lee, and we're going to talk about the last train robbery in Missouri. And it's a story I'd stumbled onto, and then I sought out Cameron Lee to bring him to you today. Also, we have some more recent true crime, local true crime, Southwest Missouri true crime. Can't say what yet, but we've got an exclusive interview on a crime that has been solved. We also have coming up an interview with Amber Vance. She's kind of the Ozark TikTok queen of true crime. Boy, that's a tongue twister. It's easier to type that than write it, than say it. And we also have a master treasure story debunker. We can't wait to share that with you. So you don't want to miss us. And these will be coming out weekly, maybe even more frequently as time goes on. There's a little bit of a technological hump we're getting over, and we appreciate you being patient with us. We appreciate that sometimes they don't have endings, or the endings are unedited, or etc. And you've stayed with us, so we appreciate you for being by today. All right, so I'm going to start off this story before I introduce Cameron. Cameron is, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, but I'm going to start off with how I found this story before I let Cameron introduce himself. So I edit the nostalgia page for the Marshville Mail and frequently use newspapers.com. And you've heard about my amazement with the concept of newspapers.com and other episodes. And so I found this article, and I'm going to read it to you. And it's from the Marshfield Mail, February 9th, 1899. It's titled The Train Robbers. The three men, Fagley, Ray, and Nye, who were in the jail at this place, meaning Marshfield, charged with complicity in the Macomb train robbery, are talking too much for their own good if they expect to make any defense. On Wednesday of last week, Lewis Nye told Sheriff Haley where to find some money he had hidden after he was arrested by the officers. On Thursday, the sheriff went to Nye's home in Douglas County and found $45 in torn bills in the exact spot Nye had told him to look. The bills were all fives and ones and showed plainly the effects of the explosion. Little foreshadowing. While the sheriff was in Douglas County, he visited the home of Fagley, another one of the robbers. Miss Fagley told him considerable of the plan of her husband and other members of the gang. I'm not going to finish it because that's a little too much. That's how I got started down the hole of the Macomb train robbery and of the subject of today's podcast, Jack the Quail-Hunter Kennedy. So without Without going any further, I would like to introduce you to my friend Cameron Lee. And Cameron, welcome to the Wild and Woolly Ozarks. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Champ. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on and to chat about Jack, who is he's my fourth great grand uncle. So it's a distant relation, but a relation nonetheless. And yeah, it's always fun to hear the few people that have heard of Jack's story, other than myself and my immediate family, but it's always weirdly similar to how we ended up hearing about it and learning more details about Jack ourselves, because he was more or less kind of cut out of the family tree to a large extent for understandable reasons, as we'll kind of get into the story in a little bit. But yeah, I'm a little bit about myself. I'm a graduate archaeology student at MU right now. I've always kind of been a fan and an enthusiast with history, especially local. I'm a Kansas City native. I've grown up in Cass County and Jackson County my whole life, so I've been around the Jesse James, the Cole Younger, all of those stories, kind of my whole life, and then on into the Pendergast years of the 20s and the gangster mobster era of Kansas City. So the stories like this always kind of naturally floated my way, and the more I got into this, the more it just kind of just sucked me in, and I can't, the same as you said, diving into newspapers.com, it's just a treasure trove, and
It
the
sure
the
is.
rabbit holes you can go down and the stories you can find, it's just too fun.
Well, this story is actually, I had found so many that I just sort of shelved it. I took one night and sat here and went down the Macomb train robbery rabbit hole. Macomb, of course, for those not knowing, is on 60 highway between Mansfield and Mountain Grove. There's a Macomb exit and I guess at one time maybe a depot there. But so I shelved it, and then I decided, as I was working through a bunch of these stories, I would reopen the case of the Quail-Hunter, and I found your Substack, and I found that I found that he had what happened to him in the end, because I'm like, whatever happened to this guy? He's in the prison. I've got him to the prison. Whatever happened? And I'm like, oh my. And then I found your Substack. And so I was like, man, we have got to get this story out here. Now, for the audience to understand, Cameron, you are writing a book on this as we speak.
Yes, yep, I am in the thick of my manuscript, my first draft right now. Kind of, I spent the last probably 2 years really diving into the as many primary sources as I can find, but mostly newspapers and reporting on the crimes and the trials and all of that. I've got probably 400 different newspaper articles clipped and saved onto a hard drive that I scroll through for all of this, plus a handful of court cases. Although the inevitably, when you're doing any historical research, you'll find at least one, if not multiple, scenarios where you get going, and eventually you hit a point where somebody goes, well, we would have had all those records, but there was a fire. And I feel like I've hit that about 5 different times on different tracks, but I've fleshed out a pretty good chunk of the story, and it's yeah, it's a really interesting one. I can jump in with a little bit of backstory on the Kennedys and kind of their involvement that
Yeah.
bled into Jack's criminal career.
Well, why don't you take us down and tell us? And first of all, we're going to be excited to see that. We're going to want you to come back when the book is ready, because I think it's just an amazing story, and I think by the time you listen to this, you're going to want to buy the book. So I hope that we do the story justice today here. So why don't you start kind of where you started and take us through the Kennedy family, Jack's early life, and then on up to where he sort of began his life at crime.
Definitely. Yeah, so the Kennedy family on my chunk of the crew, at least, they came over to Ireland, came over from Ireland, from County Limerick, in around the 1850s. There were a couple different chunks of family that came over. Some different siblings came over at different years. But around 1855, 1856, John Kennedy Sr. and his wife, Bridget McGowan Kennedy, and his brother, Dennis Kennedy, who was a Catholic priest, all came over to the United States. They immigrated in and pretty much immediately headed for Missouri. My assumption through some family records and church records is that Dennis had been more or less sent by the church to a parish in St. Louis, and the rest of the family was just deciding to relocate and follow with him. Obviously, the 1850s was a difficult time for a lot of folks in Ireland with the famine and with strife with the English and with the Protestant Catholic struggles that are always kind of popping in and out throughout history over there. And they decided that apparently nowhere else was better than Missouri in the 1850s and 60s to decide to settle down. So they headed over here. Dennis ended up moving over to Kansas City and setting up shop in a parish. It was called the Town Center Parish. I don't believe it's still active anymore. Would have been around basically right around downtown KC, and a couple different churches popped up since then. But eventually, around 1857, he gets set up in Independence, Missouri, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with the area, Independence butts directly up to the east of Kansas City, Missouri. So KC-Mo is right on the state line, and then directly next to it is Independence. And as the borders of Kansas City have shifted, Independence has stayed pretty strongly right there. And the Kennedys set up shop. They set up a small, I say small, 100 and so acre farm, mostly hogs, some horses, a few cows. I think off and on, occasionally growing corn and soybeans as the years kind of progressed, but never made a huge name for themselves. Father Dennis ends up setting up one of the first churches there in Independence, Missouri. And there's a couple stories that have popped up, and these are corroborated by some other just internal documents from the church, but they're still kind of, as a lot of these are, kind of hearsay and mythologized a little bit, but they're still fun. Apparently, around the early 1860s, at some point, Dennis was heading home and gets home super late from the church, and door gets burst down. And while he's frantically trying to figure out what's going on, these two men stumble in. They're injured. They've been shot. They've been scuffed up. They've fallen off horses. And so he, being a naturally kind and caring person, and doing his priestly duty, brings the men in, nurses them back to health, lets them stay over the night, sends them off on their way in the morning with some clean clothes, some water, some fresh food, and just sends them on their way. And as they leave, they say, thank you, and you'll always have a lookout from Frank and Jesse James. And that's probably not the most uncommon occurrence in Jackson County around that time. They were pretty prevalent figures, and myth or not, I think it was pretty common for them to kind of pop around the neighborhoods for better and for worse. It was pretty common to see them around. And the story kind of comes back around a few years later. Dennis is heading from the church over to a dying parishioner's house, which is a common occurrence. He'd go in to read his last rites, and gets held up by a handful of bandits and ripped off his horse. They think that he's a Union spy going up looking for Quantrill, looking for Jesse, and they're not falling for the priest shtick, and end up dragging him over to their camp, and they're setting him up against a tree so they can shoot him. And on the other side of the tree is none other than Jesse James, taking a nap, who is horribly disturbed by this ruckus, stands up, throws a fit, calls off his men, immediately recognizes that this is Father Dennis Kennedy, the man that saved him and his brother's life, berates the bandit that ripped him off his horse and says, no. You're never going to touch this man. This man saved my life. He's protected us. We're going to protect him. You, me, and two other men, we're going to put this man back up on his horse, and we're going to escort him to the man's house that he's going to read the last rites, and we're going to make sure that he gets there safe, and then we're going to make sure that he gets home safe. And supposedly that is the kind of the first encounter that the Kennedys had with the James boys, the first two encounters that the Kennedys had. So this is pretty early on. There's already a connection being made in this community and in these two families and these two kind of sides of the coin, if you will, of the Kennedys that ends up manifesting in Jack. And Jack's born 1868 as typically what I go with. Numbers kind of come and go here and there. No birth certificates or anything for him at the time. December 17th, 1868 or 69, out in Independence. His full name is John Fitzgerald Kennedy, which makes researching this extremely difficult.
Yeah.
You will get, even if you block out the dates and you say nothing before 1930, you will still somehow get inundated with JFK documents.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there were tons of Kennedys, and yes. I think there's a John Kennedy buried in the Marshville Cemetery. I mean, John being a very common name, there's going to be a certain number of Kennedys always named John.
Yeah. Even going back through the just my family tree, John and then changed to Jack for shorten is shortened, but nickname Jack Kennedy pops up probably every 10 years or so, every generations.
Yeah,
Jack Kennedy in the line, so it's even confusing just on my end. And so he's born 1868, and they're living out in part of Independence was called Cracker Neck. It was called that for the I guess still derogatory, for the crackers that had moved up there, the poor white farmers that had moved up there from mostly from Georgia and Virginia, around kind of post Civil War era, popping up to.
If I may make a commentary on the term cracker, this is being filmed as we're going through this whole thing with Cracker Barrel. And they keep saying, oh, they got rid of the barrel and they got rid of the cracker. And that's absolute crap, because barrels were stored, or crackers were stored in barrels. And when you went to a country store, you would buy so many pounds of crackers and so many pounds of cheese, and you could eat your lunch, maybe sausage, if you had it. So it's not a cracker in a barrel. It's specifically a cracker barrel. Anyway, so the Cracker Neck district is thusly named because the people in it were poor white Southerners sympathizing a la crackers.
Yep.
They didn't live inside a large cracker barrel and thus were called crackers.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
There is a big Cracker Barrel right in that neighborhood now. Ironic.
The Cracker Neck Cracker Barrel.
Yeah, it's a real chicken and egg kind of situation.
Yeah. There you go. So this is the environment that young Jack Kennedy comes up in, and I don't know that we need to go into it, but to say that the criminal element was not active in the post-Civil War era in that area would be demonstrably false. It was a hotbed of crime.
Yes. Yeah. It was a poor area. It was outside of the city, and even Kansas City at the time was not the kind of metropolis that it's evolved into at this point. It was still very much an agrarian community, and very much it was a cattle town. It was the midpoint. People headed west and east with their cattle and stopping on their way and to and from ranches, stopping to sell in Kansas City, and that was pretty much the lifestyle. And if you weren't a cattle rancher, you probably weren't doing all that hot in Kansas City at that time. And the Kennedys were not cattle ranchers, at least not to that scale. And there was, speaking of the criminal element, there was a robbery at Glendale Station, which the area that we're talking about, if you're familiar nowadays, it's Independence Center. So there's a Menards. It's right off I-35 as you're headed east out of KC. There's a Menards. There's a big shopping center. I think there's a Hooters. That whole area is where the Kennedy farm used to sit. And right off of I think it's Celsa and it might be Celsa and 35 even. There was a Glendale station. It was a Chicago and Alton train station, and for years that train station was robbed. And there's a cut of the rail. It's called the Blue Cut, and it's right about maybe 2 miles, west of the Glendale station. And it's a sharp turn. Trains have to slow down about 20, 25 miles an hour as they're coming into or going out of Kansas City. And right at that cut, they would just constantly be robbed. They'd get stopped, or the station would get held up, oftentimes by the James Younger gang. And in 1879, it gets held up by Jesse James and kind of a ragtag gang that's basically the last train robbery that Jesse does before his passing, before his board gets to him. And this is a pretty rudimentary holdup. They hold up the station and the passenger cars. And supposedly Jack wakes up in the night. He'd have been around maybe 11, 12, 13-ish age, young boy. Supposedly he hears the ruckus from this, because it would have only been about 4 miles from the farm. And that woke him up. He hears the gunshots. And then, of course, immediately after that, the next day, he's going to be hearing all about this story that happened, right by his house, that if he just looked out the window at the right time, he maybe would have seen him climbing on the roof of the cars as they, raced by and jumped off onto their horses. So this sense of adventure associated with train robbery, associated with the James boys, this, I say it a lot, the mythology around this, and the what we kind of have now with kind of like true crime type stuff, but or the what we had in the like 50s and 60s with the kind of mobster gangster, your
Mafia.
not being able to think your Godfather and your The Irishman and all these kinds of films that kind of like
Pendergast is kind of the OG Godfather. I mean, as far as government graft, I mean, he's like Plunkett of Tammany Hall or somebody. I mean, he really.
Yeah. And it's, those kinds of stories, that kind of thing when you're a young kid, especially a young boy, and you don't have a lot to your name, family doesn't have a lot to their name, you don't have a lot going on. It was the 1860s, 1870s. There's not a lot as far as entertainment goes, but there's newspaper stories, and there's dime novels, and there's mysteries and rumor mills.
Yeah. The embellished stories that never happened to get told as fact. We deal with that. Yeah. Still deal with that. Every needy widow in Southwest Missouri took in Frank and Jesse James during a rainstorm and left a $10 gold piece under their plate after they taught them how to make red-eye gravy. There's always a red-eye gravy, it seems like, in the Ozarks. They don't know how to make it. And so Frank James shows them how to make it with coffee, and then they leave a gold piece under the plate. And she's able to pay off her house. It always works out so nicely. It causes you to be skeptical then.
Tooth fairy quality.
Well, if you deal with these stories, then it causes you to be skeptical when you come across a really cool story like your family has. You're like,
well, that's it makes it hard. Yeah, with stories like Dennis Kennedy's encounters, it's they always come years or decades after the events, sometimes even centuries later now, and it makes it tricky. A good story nonetheless, but still,
sure,
hard to corroborate. And so this is the environment that Jack grows up in, and maybe it had more or less to do with his encounters with Jack or with Jesse. Maybe it had more or less to do with the fact that he lived so close to the train stations, but he ends up moving down south when he's around 18 or 20 years old, down to Houston, Texas. And some stories say that he tried to start running a saloon, but drank himself out of business, and which will be a par for the course as the story goes. But eventually he ends up working for the Southern Pacific Railroad as a brakeman and a fireman, and works his way up to being an engineer, which at the time was a pretty prestigious job. It would have been a fairly well-paying gig. And he joins the Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen and the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, the labor unions for those groups, as he gets going. And that's kind of right. He's there for about 12 years down there in Houston before he finally moves back up to KC around 1895, 1896.
And he leaves on good terms. He's not let go for any criminal activity.
No, there's stories that pop up decades later that
Right.
say he got blacklisted, he was accused of robbing trains on his own line, or being involved in some kind of crimes or robbery or things like this, aiding and abetting kind of stuff. But in around 1896 and 97, when he starts getting in trouble, the union sends, and even Southern Pacific themselves send employees up to testify on his behalf of his good character, basically be character witnesses. And the union even pays part of his legal fees. So I can't imagine
That's right.
I know that there's some corruption all the time, especially around that era in some of these unions. The railroad unions weren't necessarily known for that.
right.
So I'd I'd be hard pressed to say that he left on bad terms if they were that eager to help him out. But yeah, it's one of those things that the stories pop up, 10, 20, 30 years after he's left Houston, and they'll say, well, he left Houston, left the railroad, and he was blacklisted, and he started robbing
Right.
trains. Well, that makes for a better story. I'll give you.
But that's not true, as I understand it. He's an accomplished young man who has made good, because being a steam engineer is not, that's going to be important even later. We're going to find out. And his abilities in handling a train. He comes back home. He's not been really implicated in any problems that we can find up to this point. That's all hearsay way after. And then what happens? Where does he go wrong, Cameron?
So he comes back home, and like I said, he gets back home around 1895. 1896, he's been home for 6 months to a year now. As far as I can tell, he doesn't really seek employment. Well, I'm sure he was helping out on the farm, things like that. And he maybe a little bit mimicking Jesse James and the allure of those kinds of figures. He was kind of a big man about town. So he always kind of made a big deal, big show at the saloons. And like you said, he would have been doing fairly well off on himself. Even having left the railroad, he'd still would have had probably a good amount of money to himself. And on October 23rd, 1896, the Chicago and Alton train, passenger train, gets held up at that Glendale station right at that Blue Cut, and it's not really made a big deal of it. They don't get away with too much. It's assumed they made it off with maybe $25, which even back then,
Wow.
not a lot of money.
No.
And this is another thing that pops up in the paper coverage of these stories is when the robbery first happens, you'll see the paper printing a thing, and they'll say they got away with thousands of dollars, or they got away with tens of thousands of dollars. And then the actual police reports, the newspaper, or the railroad investigators, their crew will kind of come out and start making their statements to the press, and they'll say, no, it's $50 and a pocket watch, or they blew the safe and there was nothing in it, something like that. And whether or not that's a bit of propaganda playing on both sides from either end, who knows? But most often when they say they got away with a huge haul, that's probably not super accurate.
Right.
Especially because these, at least in this case here, and in most of the robberies that I'll talk about, the passengers are never touched. The trainmen, the workers, sometimes they'll be fleeced. They'll have their pockets cleaned out, but no one ever really gets hurt. No, not shots fired. It's not quite the James Younger, not quite that level of violence as often. But yeah, we have that October 23rd. They have that robbery, and the way that it goes, and I'll explain the kind of the modus operandi of these train robbers. And I hesitate to say that this is just Jack's MO, because this is kind of the MO of a lot of train robberies, specifically at this point in time. They would flag the train down at some point, typically be pretty late at night, after dark. They'd flag the train down with a red lantern. And that was kind of the go-to signal for the engineer to say there's a problem on the tracks ahead. There's danger ahead. The tracks, there's a train that's derailed. There's a tree that's fallen on the line. Something has happened. They flag the train down. The train comes to a stop. Bandits either hop on the train, or they yank the trainman, the engineer, the conductor, all the crew off the train. And then they'll hop onto the train, separate the cars beyond the express car. So you'd have the actual engine, the locomotive, and then you'd have the coal car. And then right behind the coal car you'd have the express car or the baggage car or a combination of the two. And that would have your US Express mail in it. So that's how you're safe. That's how they transport money from bank to bank. That's how, rich folk and big companies would transport large quantities of goods and money and bank orders and all this kind of stuff. And you'd also have passenger baggage and stuff on occasion. So they'd separate those and leave the passenger cars behind, drive the train up sometimes a few miles, sometimes just a handful of feet, up the tracks to kind of strand the passengers back, keep them separate, keep the commotion down. Then they'll bust into the express car. Sometimes they'll use dynamite on the safe. That almost never works out well, but they do it nonetheless. And sometimes the express messenger will have a key, or it won't be locked or something like that, and they'll get whatever they can out of it. Sometimes it's jewelry, sometimes it's cash, sometimes it's gold coins, silver coins, whatnot. And in this case, it was about $25, and it really wasn't worth it. The investigation ran dry pretty quickly. The papers touched on it, but it wasn't a big stink made about it. It wasn't really something they were chasing folks down. And because it happened out in Crackerneck, nobody talks to the cops in Crackerneck. That's still kind of true of Independence, actually. You don't get a lot of cooperation with the police in Independence, and you didn't get a lot of cooperation with Crackerneck back then. And so that's some things never change, I guess. And they kind of just wrote it off, I think, as wow, it's just those hoodlums out in the sticks causing trouble again. It's probably just some local kids or whatever. And then December 23rd, exactly 2 months later, pops up, and the exact same train on the exact same line at the exact same point gets robbed again at almost the exact same time. They both happen around 8:00 at night. And this time it's a little bit of a bigger stink. Again, they report that they're getting away with tens of thousands of dollars. It turns out it was around $2,300, which is still, that's about 80 grand in today's money. So, that's a decent living for some poor farmers back then, and really probably for anybody around KC. And they did the exact same way. They stop the train, separate the cars, and they get the safe out. They get the express messenger. By this point, the express companies had started to wisen up, and they've started arming their express messengers. But the express messengers don't really see the value of risking their own life for a safe full of a couple grand or a handful of pocket watches. So they almost never fire. And the shotgun is taken away by the bandits. There's 3 or 4 bandits are seen in this. So it's not a huge crew, but it's enough to freak everybody out. And it was really this robbery and kind of a combination of the engineer and the engineer and the brakeman start to think that they recognize these are the same crew that robbed in October, robbed the same train, same crewman in October. And they start kind of following Jack around because they know that he's worked on trains. They know that he lives in the area. They know that he's familiar with a lot of the kind of ne'er-do-wells of Crackerneck and of KC. And they start following him. They're following more people than just Jack at this time. So it's not necessarily like they're cornering him. And like you said, he had a decent reputation at the time. He didn't have any problems. He hadn't, as far as I understand, hadn't had any legal problems at the time. No run-ins with the law. And the family was in good reputation. The Kennedys were well liked, as were the McGowans, his mother's family. So there really wasn't any reason to be following him other than these kind of circumstantial connections that folks were making between the railroad investigators, which are effectively the Pinkertons, the Furlongs, and there were a couple other groups that were coming in because this was Chicago and Alton, so they had the Pinkertons working for their railroad at the time. And the real kind of nail on the head for them snagging Jack for this is that this happens December 23rd. So they start following him, and when they're following him on Christmas, he walks around town and he is just spending money like there's no end to his wallet.
Yeah.
He spends about $300 on gifts, wine, fancy meats and cheeses. He gets a whole new outfit for himself and asks the tailor to burn the trousers that he had on, and walks out of the shop in the whole new clothes. He's popping into multiple saloons, paying in full gold coins. paying off bar tabs, the whole 9 yards. So this isn't enough.
Not obvious at all. Not in any way
right.
obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. It's still not quite enough to arrest him, but it's enough to cause enough suspicion to start asking around. And that's when specifically kind of Marshal Keshler, who was the Jackson County Marshal at the time, he is the one who is tailing Jack this entire time. And there's a handful of these kind of Marshal Childs and Marshal Keshler. The two of them will kind of follow Jack for his whole career, more or less. Every time he gets in trouble, they're right on his tail. And that'll go on almost until almost till he gets put away, more or less. And they end up arresting him on December 30th. Gets arrested 8th and Walnut at a saloon at about 9 in the morning. He's held at a hotel, and this is a strange kind of a legal, I guess, definition thing. It'll pop up a couple times. He's not arrested, he's detained, but he's taken into a hotel that he's not allowed to leave, and they sweat him, is what their process is called, which is an interrogation. And they find on him, on his jacket, a roll of bills, $10 bills, that have the edges ripped off, that look like the edges had been ripped out of an envelope that they'd been sewn into. In the express cars, they would have sewn the dollar bills, similar to how now we have die packs in safes and stuff, or in money bags at the bank. They would have stitched with usually a blue thread the ends of the dollar bills into an envelope, and so you would have had to rip it out and tear the dollar bills, or very carefully go through and cut them, which the bandit's going to do that. So they found these $10 bills on him. The rip looked familiar. That was enough to bring him in. They get a childhood friend of Jack's ends up coming in, Jim Flynn. And that's where we kind of end up getting the whole story, where James Flynn says he was in with Jack on the October robbery. Jack came to him and gave him this killer idea. We're going to go rob this train. I know how trains work. I know that we can do this job. It's quick money. It'll be real easy, real harmless. Nobody's going to get hurt. Let's go do this. Flynn shows police where he can find some revolvers that were supposedly stashed. He has his wife say, like, oh, yeah, like Jack stayed at the house, and the house is real close to Glendale Station. And here's some money that supposedly Jack got from the robbery. Starts putting all these pieces together, and we end up getting this whole kind of legal battle. Jack's basically detained for the whole start of 1897, and it ends up in 2 different trials. The first trial is hung jury. They cannot make a decision. And the second trial, which ends up in the end of the year in October, is a acquittal. And this kind of starts the first of Jack's full legal troubles. But the going through the newspaper coverage of these trials is it's some real Law and Order level stuff, because it's courtrooms weren't as formal as they are now. They had a lot of folks coming in and a lot of just civilians coming in just to watch, and just onlookers. And you get a trial about a train robber, let alone maybe a 2-time train robber that used to work for the railroads and lived out by where the James boys were hanging out and robbing everything. Like, it really stoked a lot of old memories for the area. So the papers were eating it up.
Yeah, makes great copy.
Yeah, and it was that spawns a little bit of an issue of, well, are the papers exaggerating things because they know it's going to sell better? And
right.
We don't have any records of these trials specifically. Any trials that happened in Jackson County, there's just no records of. They weren't required to keep them, so they didn't. And I have yet to track down an existing copy. But the newspapers did a pretty decent job of nailing stuff down. And there were a few fun's the right word. Jack supposedly walked with a limp from an accident that he had on a train, presumably when he was a brakeman, because they would be running along the top of the train, cranking down the brakes as the train would slow down and speed up. And there was a derailment, and he had crushed his foot supposedly. So the defense said, well, Jack, they say that the lead gang member for this train robbery is walking with a limp and had a mashed up foot. Could you prove or disprove this to the court. So he just takes his shoes and socks off and sticks his feet up right up on the table in front of him, and just shows the whole court his supposedly uninjured feet, and then gets up, does a little jig, and sits back down and has a laugh, and he doesn't take it all too seriously, and that's he ends up leading to an acquittal. And a big part of that also was the fact that the prosecutor, Frank Lowe, who until he lost his election a few years later, had never had a conviction in Jackson County. So he was not very well liked.
Not very effective prosecutor.
No. And there had been accusations for years and years that the Jackson County Criminal Court was corrupt, or at best ineffective.
Right.
And Frank Lowe was kind of the definition of that. And not a single conviction, and this case was no different. And his reaction to the acquittal was, well, they were jury bribing. They were sliding money over to the jury members, or they had gone through and handpicked jury members that they knew were either in they were Brotherhood members, labor workers that would have sided with them, things like that.
Sure.
That didn't go over all that well, and the jury ended up making a statement at the end of that the acquittal trial that ended in acquittal, that they completely discounted James Flynn's testimony.
Right.
He had turned state's evidence, but in doing so admitted that he was a train robber and had been a train robber, and implicated Jack and a couple other guys in this one. And when he did that, the jury looked at it and said, well, we can't take the statement of a admitted train robber.
Right.
And that was the only evidence that the prosecution had, which did kind of end up being the template for most of Jack's criminal career.
So we have the train robbery, and while all of this is playing out, his trial, etc., or it is just played out, he gets accused with another character, Jim Redmond, of murdering Emma Schumacher. Now, Emma Schumacher was a very independent lady who had divorced her husband. She'd opened a store at the corner of 16th and Campbell Street in Kansas City. I think that's right. And basically, one night, two gentlemen walk in and they try to rob her. They shoot her, she shoots them, and the two get in a buggy and leave. Now, Jack gets accused of that. Why do you think he gets accused of that, Cameron?
So this is kind of it's a very, very weird situation. This is something that if there are any really true crime aficionados, I'd really encourage you I'll be writing an article on my Substack about it in more detail here soon. But if you're really curious about it, this is something just to go read the newspaper articles straight on newspapers.com about it, because it's just very, very intriguing and very weird. Emma gets murdered on December 8th, 1897. So this is right after Jack's trials have kind of come and gone. He's a free man again. And when basically right after she gets killed, Jack has probably one of the worst but most iconic nights of his life. And in January. In January, he is riding a horse down 17th Street, headed towards that's 17th Street, headed towards Holmes, downtown Kansas City, more or less. And it's a cold January night, and his horse slips, he falls off, cracks his head open on the curb, gets dragged into a grocery store, and the folks are trying to help him. They're trying to check him out, make sure that he's all right. He's completely dazed, completely more or less knocked out for a while. And as they're checking him out to make sure that he's okay, they quickly figure out this is not a normal situation, because he has a fake beard, a black mask that's been tucked into his jacket. He's got a red lantern that is now shattered, that was also hidden in his jacket. And he's got a shotgun, a bandolier of ammunition, and a revolver. So he's kind of armed to the teeth, and he's hit it out for a very specific job. And immediately everybody kind of puts two and two together. Now, for better and for worse, the ambulance was just the police at that time in Kansas City. So when they call for help, it's already an officer coming anyway. So the ambulance car, more or less a buggy, pops up. They take him to police HQ downtown on 2nd Street. He goes through surgery on his nose, surgery on his head because he's broken his nose. He's cracked his skull open. He's just in really bad shape. And they confiscate all his gear, give him a new set of clothes. And when they're cleaning him up, he finally starts to come to, and they're starting to question him. Jack, what are you doing? Why do you have all this? Why do you have all this stuff? Where were you going? What were you doing? Who were you with? And his immediate response is just, "Oh, I was going back to Cracker Neck. I was going quail hunting. That's why you got to have the shotgun to go quail hunting.
Yeah.
Why do you have the mask? Oh, I didn't have the mask. Somebody put that in my pocket. I didn't have that mask. Why'd you have a revolver? Oh, you shouldn't go to Cracker Neck without a revolver." Just
fake beard. Why'd you have a fake beard?
Yeah, and it's just it's not a great defense. He's still detained for it. He ends up getting detained for concealed carry and for vagrancy. They don't really take that to trial. It's more or less just to hold him and make sure that he's not getting up to trouble while they investigate to see if he was getting ready to rob a train or if anybody else popped up or anything.
And thus the
name obviously
right. Yeah, that's the name. He's called the Quail-Hunter from that point on.
Yep. Yeah, and that's almost immediately after this. The press picks up on that, and they love it because you gotta have you got a thief or a criminal. You gotta have a good snazzy nickname, and I guess Quail-Hunter is as good as any.
It's not really street tough. I would say it's I don't know that. Oh, here comes the Quail-Hunter. No, it's too threatening, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it had too many folks rattling in their boots or anything. I don't even know if he embraced it all that much either. Other people embraced it on his behalf for sure, though. And right at this time, this is February. Schumacher had been killed in December, so that investigation had been kind of ongoing. They detained a few people thinking that it was the guy, and there was some folks that were arrested out in St. Joe, and that proved to be a dead end. And what ends up happening is while Jack is in prison being held on this in a horrible fall, some testimonies come out of the woodwork from Kit Rose's house. And the specific testimony that comes out is a William Handy, who was a former slave. He was actually enslaved by and I can't remember specifically who, but it was a judge out in Jeff City, is where he was born in slavery. In the household of this judge out in Jeff City, and then found his way to Kansas City as a young adult when he was freed, and ends up living with this Kit Rose family. And they're relatives of the Youngers by marriage, although not really associated. They're I believe Kit Rose's wife is the sister of Cole Younger, so they're related but not associated. And by this point, Cole Younger had been in prison for quite some time, and not a great association there.
Sure.
William Handy and his wife had been working at the Kit Rose house around 14th and Pennsylvania Avenue in Kansas City for quite a few years at that point. The Roses were friends with the Kennedys. They'd also lived out in Cracker Neck. And William Handy goes to the police with a very detailed, fairly fleshed out testimony of Jim Redmond and Jack Kennedy came to Kit Rose's house the night of the murder. Jim had a bullet wound to his jaw. They were fixing him up. I heard them whispering about the robbery and how it went wrong. They were fretting over having killed Emma, or if she had died, or if she had survived. And Handy said that he had heard them nights prior when they had come and stayed at the house talking about plotting train robberies. And that same night when Emma had been killed, there had been a handful of other holdups of grocery stores and small shops and even individuals in the area of what is now kind of the crossroads of Kansas City, but at the time was kind of Independence Avenue down to Campbell Street.
Sure.
And so Handy was kind of making the connection with this of it was Jack and Jim Redmond had been going around, and they had done all of this kind of crime spree on this night. And other things.
Now Jim Redmond and I'm just going to save the audience some trouble here. It doesn't really add up that they would do this. Jack Kennedy didn't hurt people. He did not go after civilians. He really never even really shot anybody. I don't think there's any record he actually harmed anyone. Jim Redmond, though, there's a lot of mystery, and actually the most interesting part about the whole thing is who's Jim Redmond. So give us a little. They never proved that these two were anywhere even close to it. It's all just based on this testimony, and then the former slave dies.
Yes, yeah. Handy passes away a few years, a couple years later in I think 99.
Right.
And he passed away from he passed away specifically from like fluid in the lungs, but it was he had been battling for years with alcoholism and opiate addiction. And one of the things that the Rose family
good eyewitness there.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that the Rose family members had said in their testimony was, well, you can't take everything he says completely seriously because he has these problems and these addictions, and so that muddied the waters a lot, and there were rewards out for Jack mostly from the railroad companies because they, accurately or not, he was accused of robbing trains, and these investigators got paid for arrests. Whether or not the guy was the guy didn't really matter.
Yeah.
So if you can bring the guy in and you can get a conviction, you're going to get a payday.
Right.
And it was not uncommon for someone to, in seeking that reward, end up just snagging somebody and basically end up just getting a patsy so that they can get the reward money. And there's a chance that some of these confessions that came out in some of the crimes, like James Flynn or any of these guys, they were doing that in an effort to get the reward. And there's a chance that with Handy that it was either he had misheard things or, who knows what all was going on. And we only get kind of the two sides. We get the confession or the testimony, and then what the Roses say, and how the press portrays both of those, which is 1890s 1890s press is pretty yellow at the time. So and this, like you said, it doesn't really go anywhere. There's no conviction. There's not really even a trial for this other than a preliminary trial. And Jim Redmond kind of disappears into thin air. Jack stays in town, and Jim,
and we're not really even sure who he was to begin with, right?
No. He had been in jail with Jack at the same time when Jack was arrested for the earlier train robberies in Blue Cut.
Right.
So we know that I think they were, maybe the cells were in the same block at the time. Supposedly they became friends at that point, but that's kind of hearsay from jailers and sheriffs at the time that said, oh yeah, they became chummy and Jack would come visit him, but who knows how accurate that is. And then when Jim disappears, there's a few different stories that pop up saying that he has a wife and a kid over in St. Joe, or he's got a wife and a kid in Arkansas, or he's got a wife and a kid in Wichita,
or he joins the Rough Riders.
Yeah, that became kind of the prevailing one. Was he's been spotted by a barber with the Rough Riders down in Florida. I think in Santiago is the furthest, and then in Manila. There's
weren't they going to extradite him from the Philippines? And then I could never find another thing about it.
No, I think he disappears after that because they sent, if I had it pulled up, by the time word would get to Kansas City that they think that they've identified him, he would disappear.
Yeah.
Now that may mean that wasn't ever him, and it was a false alarm.
Yeah.
It may mean that he got word first that they were onto him and he bolted, but he never gets. There's one occasion in I think in '99 when he gets, supposedly, a man being identified as Jim Redmond was detained, and I think this was in Santiago.
Right.
And by the time anybody from Kansas City can start to react, he has already gotten loose.
Here you go. April 12th. Um, wow, it says it's Sunday, December 30th, 1900. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but these things don't always work. I'll just read you the text. United States officer arrived in San Francisco from the Philippines with Jim Redmond, the suspected accomplice of Jack Kennedy, the murder of Emma Schumacher. Redmond was recently restored to liberty without a trial. So let me just look at that right quick, because if anybody out there can track down Jim Redmond, please contact us, because it's kind of interesting what happened to him here. Okay, actually, hit the highlight thing for the article. Okay, this is the Kansas City Times, December 30th, 1900, page 3. And I'm trying to figure out, take me back. Anyway, irrespective of that, he's kind of a mystery. Whatever happened to Jim Redmond, and we don't really know. He doesn't really appear again. So Jack Kennedy is still being looked at for the murder of Emma Schumacher. And then in December, he decides he's going to take a trip south.
Yeah. There's he basically that whole year of 98 going into 99, he is just in and out of prison. He's detained for one thing, he's detained for the October 96 robbery, gets out of there with $1,000 bond from his dad. Then he's detained for the Schumacher murder. That's a $5,000 bond he gets released on. Then the grand jury comes up. They re-indict him with the grand jury for the Schumacher murder again. That's another $5,000. Then that goes to preliminary trial. They offer him up for bail again. That's $10,000. So they're running up, getting close to like $20,000 a year for
all concurrently, all at the same time.
Yeah, all in the span of about a year.
Yeah.
And so it's understandably, Jack's not in a great place. The family is not in a great place. His dad is on record saying that they've had to start selling acreage at the Kennedy farm. Even his brother-in-law, James Allen, who is actually my direct ancestor, is supposedly also going in with John Kennedy Sr. to pay for some of these bonds. And while all of that's going on, you've got a train robbery that Jesse James Jr. gets indicted in and implicated in, that Jack supposedly coordinated, but he's not indicted. So there's all this kind of weirdness going on right at this time. And then Jack gets out. He's freed on this $10,000 bond in December, and more or less vanishes. The assumption from the family was he was going to come back to Crackerneck. He was going to work on the farm, lay low until they maybe have another trial for the Schumacher murder, and until the Jesse James Jr. trials and everything kind of calmed down in that would have been 1899, because the James Jr. trial went on for quite a while. And that, while Jack has vanished for the most part, maybe he's gone back down to Texas, maybe he's hiding out in Missouri somewhere. It's kind of up in the air. Even after all this stuff, we still don't fully know. But on January 3rd, 1899, the Frisco passenger train gets robbed in Macomb. And it's pretty much an identical scenario to what we've been seeing in all these other robberies. Similar to the Leeds robbery, the Leeds robbery that Jesse James Jr. was actually involved in, or maybe involved in.
I don't think they can ever say that he really was involved in that. I think he was accused.
No, he was acquitted, and it in my opinion, at least, it feels very much like a Pinkerton setup. They were going after him on behalf of his dad and his family name.
I don't think
there
there's
was a big reward.
Any evidence that he really had any criminal activity, any extensive criminal activity in Jesse.
He was running a cigar shop in the courthouse. He was a stand-up citizen. He was fairly young. He was in his mid-20s at the time, a bit younger than Jack, but he was by all means a stand-up citizen. And when he got out of that, he gets acquitted, and he gets a law degree and practices law in Kansas City for a number of years before he moves out to California. So yeah, it's very much a weird situation that just threw his family for a loop for about a year and a half.
So you talk about a guy with lots of stuff hanging over him. So Jack Kennedy, then this Macomb train robbery. So this is where one of the first things I explored. And basically, he recruits a local gang, and they stop the train, same calling card, but they absolutely use dynamite and blow, as I think the Springfield paper says, the express car was blown to matchsticks. And they robbed the passengers, something that he never has done if he truly has been involved in these other train robberies. He's never robbed passengers. So take us through that gang and kind of what they do there.
Yeah, so there were 6 or 7 involved, depending on kind of who you want to count as the crew. So Elmer Byram, Lewis Nye, and Jake Fagley, they were all local farmers to the area around Douglas County area. They're kind of the first guys to get arrested. And I think actually, let me see specifically, I think it was Byram that was arrested first. Or maybe Nye was arrested for. Either way, these local guys, they get caught pretty quickly. Byram turned state's evidence almost immediately, and none of these guys have train experience. I don't think any of them had extensive outlaw experience of any kind, really. And where you start to get into kind of the connections to Jack and the maybe more clear, obvious connections to Jack is we get Joseph Shepard, who's using an alias. His real name is Shoop, and Bill Ryan, who was using the alias Jennings, and in previous times had used the alias Evans. And Bill Ryan was a former Jesse James gang member. He was in the James Younger gang. He was at that 1879 robbery at Glendale. He had been in the Missouri State Pen prior to that and got out right a few years before Jack moved back to KC. And supposedly at some point in the early 1890s, Bill Ryan and Jack Kennedy had hit it off. They'd become friends. The Kennedys and the Ryans had known each other for a long time. The Ryans' farm was right next door to the Kennedys. Andy Ryan was a fireman in Kansas City, and he was Bill's younger brother. He was good buddies with Jack. He got indicted for a handful of robberies because of his association with Jack. Ended up getting fired from the fire department because of it. He kind of made it out okay. He opened a saloon and did pretty well in Westport in Kansas City after Jack went off to the pen later on. But introducing Bill Ryan into this, or Jennings as he's called it at Macomb, really kind of brings in this association with Jack and the more Jamesian aspects of the robbery, the robbing the passengers, the excessive use of dynamite. And again, there's not really, I think it was $800 supposedly. That was $800 or $900 that was found,
watches
supposed to be in the safe.
Yeah, some watches and some personal effects that were identified.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
how stupid.
Yeah, and it's, that's by the 12th, pretty much everybody in this crew has been arrested. And there was one other man, there was Oscar Ray, who I believe he was not indicted.
No,
I think
he
was arrested. And he was another local farmer, may or may not have been clued into the whole plan and plot, but he was basically paid to get on the train and then stop
at Kabul, I think.
Yeah,
and then
like just a little crossing.
Yeah, it's only about it'd be a short trip by train from there. And then he got off during the robbery, or he went and rode it all the way to Macomb later, because he really didn't help much one way or the other if he were involved with the robbery.
Yeah, my understanding was that his entire, well, at least according to the official story that the way that the court ended up seeing it, was that his involvement was only to have a ticket that had it stopping at Macomb. And so that he would basically, because people wouldn't normally stop there because he was
they'd
stopping
have to
there,
be
the
slowing
train
up
would
the
be.
train.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That's why he gets off, because he's not, there's no evidence, at least presented, that he actually was involved in the robbery. He was
right.
just maybe an unwitting accomplice.
Well, and he's described as not very swift too. He's described as very maybe even a little slow, and he has like a wife and 6 kids in destitute condition. It doesn't paint a real good picture, so they let him go. He was one of the ones that was jailed in Marshfield after it to hold him, because Wright
Yep.
County didn't have any jail to speak of.
Yeah. And it was while those guys were being held in Marshfield, that was Marshall Childs up in Kansas City went down to Marshfield to investigate, because he had heard about the robbery in the days after and thought, well, that sounds familiar. I ought to go check that out, see if any of these guys look like Jack or anybody else. And they didn't, but Byram described a Jack Wright, spelling it like the county. And when he described him and talked about his mannerisms, that was when the Kansas City officials started making the connection to Jack. And it was December. Let's see, it was December 9th. Jack is hanging out downtown Kansas City, his normal kind of snazzy self, and he decides he's going to go into the barber shop, and he sees a little flyer that has been put out by the Pinkertons' office in Kansas City. And I'll post this up on my Substack, because it's pretty interesting. They had put out a reward the morning of the 9th for $500 for the arrest of Jack, and they put in a little description of him. He's 5'7.5", 160 pounds, brown hair, brown mustache, if any facial hair, and that was pretty much it. Described the cuts and scrapes on his nose and his forehead. Ears protruding past his head, which is a fun family trait that we all have, that we and they put out this little thing, and Jack sees it, and as he's headed to the barber shop, and he walks into his barber, who's named Tom Hanks. And so JFK walks into Tom Hanks' barber shop and
it
says,
just sounds like there's a joke there somewhere, but
yeah. It's an SNL skit.
Yeah.
And so Jack walks in, and he's got this flyer for this reward, and he looks at Tom and he says, you know what? You've been a great guy. You're a buddy of mine. Why don't you take me over to the police and turn me in, and you'll get this $500 reward. And then I'm going to get out of this thing. So I'm not worried about it. Well, you get a reward. I'll get to hang out in the jail for a little bit, and then I'll get to go home. No problem at all. But while he's in getting his presumably getting his mustache shaved off and getting his hair cut, a different individual sees him walk in, recognizes that's Jack, recognizes that there's a reward, and runs off to get a police officer to go arrest him. He gets arrested. He gets taken down to I think first he's taken down to Springfield, and then he gets taken down to Hartville, where he's eventually tried down there in Wright County. But he this reward situation ends up causing a bit of a stir, because there ends up being a lawsuit between the civilian and the officer as to who would get the reward, because the civilian argued that I should get the reward because I brought the officer to Jack, and the officer says I get the reward because I arrested him. And you would think the officer would be eligible for the reward, since he's already kind of getting paid to do that. But the officer won out, and he got the $500 reward. And Jack got shipped off.
So I guess the moral of the story is when you finger somebody for robbery, you make sure you go ahead and arrest them and capture them yourself, so you can be entitled to the full reward.
It is a bit of a dangerous system that's kind of well, you got to do a citizen's arrest, or it defeats the whole purpose. It's kind of the old it discourages the see something say something adage.
Right. So talk to us about they go to trial in Hartville. they're all guilty. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's
everyone
not,
except for Ray is found guilty.
yeah, he's not even really prosecuted. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that I found interesting in researching these people is Jennings, Evans, Whiskey Head Bill Ryan. There's, if you look on the internet for Bill Ryan, the train robber, there are entries that says that he died shortly after getting out of prison. Now, I've not been able to corroborate those, but at the time of the investigation, the papers, should you look this up, in the weeks and months following the robbery, you will find that the papers are having some debate and officials are being brought in because they can't decide if William Jennings is Whiskey Head Bill Ryan. And so, uh, today you just take a set of prints or you do photo recognition. I mean, it's done. I mean, like that. There's no drawn out process, but we're talking weeks just to identify who this guy is. So,
so many aliases, and yeah,
I would too. So, anyway, so tell us how this trial plays out.
So it, for one, this is kind of the most well documented trial of any that Jack had. This
Right.
is the only one that we actually have a court document for. We actually have in the Missouri Historical Society, he actually has a collection of William Orr, who was the prosecuting attorney for the state in this trial. All of his documents are out there. They're housed in a collection, and I've been able to digitize quite a few of those.
And they're available on your Substack, right?
Yes, yeah. I scanned his he Orr made a scrapbook of sorts of a lot of photographs and notes and kind of comments. He actually made comments about like Lewis Nye. I think called him a half-wit farmer.
Right.
It's a lot of little kind of, I guess, character notes and such that went into it. But the trial, it played out a lot. It played out similar to Jack's earlier trials, although his defense, while I guess I should start with the prosecution. The prosecution was pretty much leaning on the confession of Elmer Byram, which is how most of these stories went, where they leaned on the confession of one of the train robbers, and that indicted and connected everybody else to the whole thing. The other thing is that Jack normally would have a pretty solid alibi built up, if not dozens and dozens of corroborations for an alibi. In the 1896 cases, he was at this specific saloon on Walnut Street, and there were dozens of people who came forward to say, yes, I saw him there, and I had drinks with him, I played cards with him, and then Andy Ryan saying he saw him at the firehouse, all these kinds of things. This being all the way out in Macomb, Jack didn't have that.
Right.
And he hadn't been seen in Kansas City since December. So he's really out of his element in here. And his alibi ends up getting stuck to more or less just, I wrote these letters. I mailed these letters to my family and to some friends. And they're time stamped. One of these is dated for, I mailed it from El Paso on the day of the robbery. So I couldn't have been in Macomb.
Right.
But then you get folks saying that he was in Kansas City the day after the robbery and the days before the robbery, so he couldn't have been in Texas and Kansas City, but he could have been in Kansas City and gotten to Macomb. So that is a lot of what the prosecution and the defense are going back and forth on, is trying to corroborate this alibi and corroborate Byram's confession. The alibi falls apart pretty quick. The letters are fairly obviously remailed from earlier, having been written earlier, or having been written later and been remailed from El Paso up to Kansas City, like he was prepping to have these alibis ready, or someone was prepping to have them ready on his behalf. The papers cover, they write out a couple, or transcribe, I guess, a couple of these letters. They're almost illegible. They're written in fairly kind of almost like a broken English. Presumably Jack would have not been very literate, so it does make sense. They're more or less just saying, hey, I'm gonna be home for Christmas, but I'm stuck doing some work down here, stuff like that.
Sure.
Pretty normal kind of letters, and just doesn't do him any favors at all. And he's got really doesn't have the alibis coming out of the woodwork, doesn't have the support from the family anymore. The Schumacher murder really turned support for Jack away, and the connection with Bill Ryan, assuming that this really is Bill Ryan, really kind of pulled folks away from him in specifically in this case. And this is the first time that he actually gets convicted of anything. And like you said, they all get convicted. They all get kind of different years. Jack gets sentenced to 17 years in the state pen. I think Bill Ryan got sentenced to I think 20, and then I think Nye also got sentenced to around 20. And yeah, this was the first time there was an actual conviction for Jack
Extension cord.
on any of his crimes.
I need my extension cord. We're running out of power in here. Sorry, we had to.
No, you're good.
We have to hook up power to something here. Our battery's going down. So
no worries. So yeah, this is his first conviction. He's like I said, he gets 17 years, and the others all get around that. I think it's between 10 and 20 for pretty much all 6 of the convictions.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in Jack enters the state prison on, or well, I shouldn't say that. He enters prison on February 3rd, 1900. He is fully convicted, and his appeal is denied by the Supreme Court in January of 1901. And that is more or less officially when his sentence begins. And he ends up serving 12 of those 17 years, which is still a sizable chunk of time. He gets out in 1912 and has a handful of, I guess, like small little misadventures while he's in prison. The Missouri State Pen is famously famously a horrible institution and a very haunting place to be put. And not that state prison ever at any point is ever a great place to be, but the cells were incredibly cramped. The conditions were horrible. The prisoners were worked pretty much day in and day out for the most part. And a book that I ended up stumbling upon that made for one of the more interesting rabbit holes in this whole thing was called actually I was kind of
I'm trying to think of it too. It was written by the
Legions of
go ahead.
Yeah, that's the Legions of Purgatory and Hell, being the true story of Missouri's penitentiary by one of its prisoners. And it was written by Walter Hamilton, who was a native of Clinton, Missouri, and he's buried out there. I've tracked down his grave and some potentially extended family members out in kind of my neck of the woods in Cass County and Bates County. But he wrote this book that the only copy that I know of is in the Missouri Valley collection at the KC Library. And one of the chapters that he wrote is titled Some Remarkable Prisoners. And he has a section in there that's specifically about Jack the Quail-Hunter Kennedy. And it's a very interesting, almost a character study of Jack, and talks about how friendly he was, how kind he was to his fellow inmates. Tells the story of he had an inmate who was trying to raise enough money to post bail to get out and raise money for his defense and things like that. And Jack went around the prison and kind of petitioned people to raise money and pull money together for him, wrote letters outside of prison to get money for him. And then when he left, said he didn't want anything in return, just wanted to see his friend better off. And Hamilton went on to tell a story that Jack supposedly said while sitting around the jail lunch table, of how Jack went up before going down to Houston as a young man, went up to Wyoming, worked on a cattle ranch for a wealthy rancher, ends up getting into a shootout, and everybody dies except for Jack, which kind of builds into the story of him being a master sharpshooter, which we never really see play out. But if you're going to be a train robber, you got to be a sharpshooter.
Well,
And
yeah, and there's other one of the things I found kind of fascinating is because Jack had so much experience with steam engines, they had him working in the powerhouse when they were fitting out the steam boilers and running them.
yeah,
He would go up and and he knew how to manipulate them and get them to work. And then there was the uh, when he was still getting accused of train robberies. That's what I find so hilarious. It's like, well, we think Jack Kennedy and crew may be involved, and it'd be like in Alabama or something, and then he'd take it to the guards and said, "Here, you can claim the reward. You got me."
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
The legend truly exceeds the
imagine
man.
yeah. That had to be such a weird but kind of fun interaction. I'm sure supposedly he had and this is even true in Jackson County, he had a really good rapport with his jailers always. I
Sure.
assume he was just a real charismatic guy,
Yeah.
and it just kind of hard not to like him. And I can just see the, I'm sure it'd be Jackson County or Kansas City be getting a call saying, "We need to know where Jack is. We think he robbed a train in Chicago."
Yeah.
And I go, "Oh God, all right, you got to call to Jeff City
He must
and
have
just
escaped.
yeah, and check in to see if he's still in Jeff City." And then the guards in Jeff City looking in his cell, going, "Hey Jack, you still there? I'm still here. You didn't rob a train. I didn't rob a train. All right."
It's,
That's
yeah, it's sort of like what Jesse James Jr. went through. Just, you know, even though you're not guilty, you're still guilty. So
yeah,
Jack serves out his time. He gets out. It's a different world when he gets out. It's 1912. And he has tell us what he initially does, because that's sort of fascinating.
yeah. He this took a little bit of digging for me to track down because I kind of had a gap in what happens to him right after he gets out of prison. But late 1912 and into 1913 and 14, uh, you start seeing advertisements in the paper for a 3-reel silent moving picture show. Not quite a movie, more like a presentation. And it was a reenactment. He had filmed a reenactment of one of his train robberies, and then he would show that in theaters, opera houses, wherever he could get it, and then lecture over the silent film about the woes of a life of crime and the ills of whiskey, and how he basically kind of his almost revivalist preacher kind of shtick of kind of a come to Jesus moment type thing. This is not an uncommon thing with I even know when I was in school, we had multiple, ex-convicts would come and they would talk at the
Sure.
school and give a lecture, or come to the church or something and give a
Sure.
lecture of I was a drug addict and I got out and I found I found my way, and this
Right.
is now kids, it's the DARE program kind of thing, right? Where you get
Right.
kind of trying to keep people on the right track by showing them the example that you had to lead. And apparently that's what Jack was doing. Is he was touring all around the country. He went specifically, he was at the Gillis Opera House here in KC, but all the way up to Minnesota, down to Paris, Texas. And it was in Paris, Texas, when Jack ended up dying. The paper down in Paris wrote an article that said that he had come down there with his moving picture show and his lecture, and it hadn't been doing very well. And he sold the reels to some entrepreneur that owned a theater down there in Paris, Texas. And then that guy sold the reels to another guy, and then that guy sold the reels to another guy. So they had kind of a chain of custody of these pictures. I have not been able to track down any of these individuals, but it's on my list of things I'm
Right.
tracking down. I'm sure that if those reels exist, that they're unwatchable, but I'm sure they've been lost to time. But it's very interesting. It's so, especially considering where his story ends, it's so interesting to see that he gets out of prison, presumably had lived a fairly modest life while he was away, and goes in and tries to kind of do what Jesse James Jr. did. Jesse James went out and started playing his dad in some silent pictures. He worked as a consultant for some movies. It also kind of didn't pan out all that well, but around this time, Jesse James Jr. was out in California filming movies. And I think that may have been what inspired Jack a little bit to start doing this and try to do it. And it never picked up.
Right.
There's advertisements that show him, selling tickets to it for 10 cents a show. And I don't think it did all that well. And then he kind of drops off. There's not really any records of him. He doesn't get in any more trouble until 1922, and that's when we get to his final bout.
So what happens? This is what floored me when I found it out, because it's 1922.
Yeah. This is honestly, I mean, this is kind of probably the most publicized thing that Jack ever did, is his final misadventure, whichever. 1922 rolls around. November 3rd, Jack and a young, I think he was 20 years old, 20 or 21. His name Harvey Logan, or Lodgeton. You'd spell it kind of differently in certain papers. They robbed the Frisco passenger train number 805. It was called the Memphis Flyer, outside of Wittenberg, Missouri. It's in an area that now is a conservation district called 76. It's been unincorporated for a really long time, but it was a little kind of a port town called 76 down there along the river. And by the time that this robbery happens, Jack and Harvey had already been being tailed for weeks. Jack was older. He's in his 50s now. And supposedly he just went around all over the place, Arkansas, Missouri, talking about trying to gather a gang up, presumably kind of maybe a last hurrah, or trying to get back into it. It's a little unclear what his motivations really were. I'm certain he was fairly destitute at the time. His father had passed away while he was in prison. His mother, they had to sell the farm by then, and his mother was living in a fairly small apartment with a couple of his sisters in downtown KC. None of his siblings associated with him. He had 9 siblings, so he had a big family to be cut out of. And by the time he gets out of prison, nobody is associating with him. So he's got nobody for this whole stint. Brings in this Harvey Logan, and presumably brings in a third and maybe even a fourth man that is a detective, an investigator of some caliber with the Postal Service.
And that guy is supposed to be a wheelman. He's supposed to drive a getaway car.
Yeah. So they had stashed a getaway car kind of in the trees where they normally would have put their horses, but it's 1922, so they have an actual getaway car now.
He's changed with the times.
Yeah, he was trying to evolve. And they've been being hounded this whole time, and Jack presumably was just completely unaware. He's got this young accomplice who just has no idea what's going on. And they knew exactly where he was going. They knew exactly where his getaway car was. They knew exactly where he was going to get on the train and where they were going to jump off the train. And as soon as they jump off the train, Jack and Harvey are confronted with, I think, around 7 investigators. It's county officers, a couple Kansas City officers that have come out, and then postal inspectors. And if you know anything about kind of this era and previously, the postal inspectors don't mess around. It's very much, they're a very it sounds kind of like a light and kind of light and fluffy law enforcement.
No, it's like G-men. They're like G-men.
Yeah.
Well, they really are, technically.
Yeah, they will disappear you in the night. Yeah. They're a very serious outfit to this day for the most part. And they basically had him surrounded and confronted. And as the papers reported, at least, either Jack or Harvey went to draw a weapon and they just got lit up. They were just shot immediately. Everyone, Jack and Harvey don't get a shot off, and they get killed immediately. Their bodies are taken back to, not taken to Wittenberg. Where are they taken? Perryville. Yep, they're taken back to Perryville, and taken back to the coroner's office there, and they're actually put up on display to have the coroner take photos so that they can identify them and make sure that they know for sure who they are. They send those photos out to Kansas City and St. Louis and a few other places. But then they leave their bodies up on display at the depot in Perryville for, I think, about a week. It's quite a few days that they leave them up. And folks stop in Perryville on the train to see the dead train robbers. And I'm sure by 1922, that felt like kind of maybe seeing a medieval night somewhere.
Yeah.
And folks would stop and kind of gawk, I guess. And
Right.
I'm not. It's a little morbid. I get it, I guess, but it's for 1922 that feels too recent. Yeah.
Well, it just sort of
some years ago, but
they did that with Bonnie and Clyde a few years later. Yeah. And I've always maintained in the Missouri, Kansas, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma quadrant, there is a short time between Jesse James and Bonnie and Clyde. And it's an interesting evolution because we see Jack evolve. So how much money did they get in that robbery? Was it at least if he's going to die, it's got to be his biggest score ever?
It was just letters. It was just mail.
There
may have been checks, but they didn't report any money taken.
I really hoped he was like up to $10,000 if you're gonna go down in a hail of bullets for it.
Yeah,
hopefully
sacks of gold.
Yeah, that's why they couldn't catch. They caught him because he was carrying sacks of gold. But poor Jack, he didn't end up. So
no. So yeah, and they get a kind of a pauper's grave, the two of them down there in Perryville. So they're buried down there in unmarked graves. I've identified the plot and confirmed with the graveyard organization that manages the graveyard down there. We've kind of talked with the family off and on about putting some money together for a headstone for him, just to have some kind of marker out there. The papers say that money had been sent from some of his sisters.
Yeah, it's in
Kansas City.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah. If that's the case, I'm not sure what the money went to because he's in an unmarked pauper's grave, the same that he would have been in either way. And Harvey is buried right next to him.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things of maybe they sent money and it didn't go where it needed to go, or maybe it wasn't enough or whatnot. There was a bit of a stir in Perryville at the time of him being buried in that cemetery because they didn't want out of town criminals being buried with their loved ones. And I think it was either the coroner or maybe the sheriff or someone made comments of, well, we got local criminals buried there, so what's the difference?
Yeah, we ought to have some foreign ones too.
Well, yeah, that's the last hurrah, I guess, of Jack, and it's a very weird ending to me. It's a weird ending to his story because it in a way there's a lot of times in his story where you can look at it and go, did he ever rob a train? Was he ever this guy that he was being made out to be? Or how many of the robberies was he really involved with?
Because he's accused of like several dozen.
Yeah, if you attributed every robbery that he is kind of formally accused in, it'd be close to 19. I think it's 19 or 20.
Is that the last? Is that the last train? I'm sorry, there's a little delay. I talked over you. Is this though the last train robbery in Missouri? Do we know that?
I think it is, but don't quote me.
We challenge if you're out there in listener land and you know of one that happens after 1922, we'd love to know it. But I've looked and I don't think there is.
Now, I know that it's not the last train robbery in America by any means.
No,
but it may be. I would be interested to see if there was another one in Missouri. There may have been. No, I can't think of another one that would have been after 22.
If you search train robbery on YouTube or last train robbery, you come up with that one in England in the 60s, or you hit just the Northfield, the Jesse James robbers, and they don't get into anything beyond Frank and Jesse and the immediate family. So
it had really died down by 22. For one, they'd kind of transportation had started to shift. Your passenger rail, even by then, is already starting to change.
Right.
And just the criminal element had changed. The nature of crime and it wasn't any easier to get money robbing a train by then than it was to get money robbing a store or
bootlegging,
anything like that.
all you had to
Yeah.
do is, I mean, you could make a lot of money quick. I mean, and without a lot of hassle. It's not like how they hunt, drug dealers and such today. Well, I tell you, Cameron, we've gone quite a long time here. It's great to get this story out. We are looking forward to your book, so you have to keep in touch with the podcast and let us know what's going on. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing with us this story. It's truly quite a tale. And tell everybody again where they can find you.
Yes, you can find me at on Substack. You can search quailhunter.substack.com or just search Hunting the Quail Hunter on Google or on substack.com. That'll pull up my blog. And you can also check me out personally on Instagram at KC_camcorder. I post a lot of the kind of newspaper clippings and photos that I find, and also just other side projects that I get working on in grad school and such. So you can always check me out there. But Hunting the Quail Hunter, and that'll also be the book title, or at least it's the tentative title.
Well, and I want to also shout out, if you want to read more on this, I encourage you to go on newspapers.com and look at the various entries from 1895 on up through 1922. And I want to also thank the Perry County Historical Society, who I reached out to and were able to help me find a lot of this before I found Cameron, actually. And so if you're in Perryville, Missouri, and you get a chance, they have a display on this, I believe. Drop by the museum in Perryville at the Historical Society and check out the display on Jack Kennedy. Gentle people, thank you for joining us today for the exciting saga of Jack the Quail-Hunter Kennedy. If you enjoyed our time together, give us a like and hit that subscribe button and give us a like or a review. I said like twice, so be sure to do it. Be sure and hit the ding-a-ling thing so you don't miss an episode over the next few weeks. We will have more coming up. You won't want to miss it. We've got local true crime. Like I said, I can't tell you what it is yet, but you're going to be, it's going to be a great story. I've got Amber Vance, the Ozarks TikTok queen of true crime. Boy, that, once again, it's easier to type that than to say it. And then the master treasure debunker. I've also got more stories from Vance Randolph and some other characters that are going to drop by with some news and a few of our sponsors. So follow us on this platform as well as Instagram and Facebook. YouTube and TikTok are still in the works. Look for updates and extra content. Thank you. My producer is Kenneth Herren, and thank you, Cameron Lee, once again for joining us. Drop us a line if you have a story to suggest. And this is coming up with Halloween, particularly if you have a ghost story. Drop us a line at wildandwoollyozarks@gmail.com. Also, remember, I don't know what we're supposed to remember. Something. It's been a long podcast. Until next time, you all be careful. And boys, if you would, please be good to